The wind tore across the open field without warning, bending the tall grass beneath a fresh coat of snow and pressing hard against the single fence line that marked the edge of Thomas Hale's land. The fence had stood there longer than he had been alive, its posts darkened by decades of storms, its wire tightened by hands that believed boundaries mattered. Thomas stood still near the wide, curved path that led toward town, his boots half buried, his breath visible in the cold. A rough rope hung from his gloved hand, dragging a faint line behind him in the snow. He had carried that rope through countless winters, a tool of discipline, habit, and order. Yet this morning, it felt heavier than usual, as if it carried more than its weight. Across the field, the old oak tree rose in silence, massive and patient, its bare branches stretching into a pale sky. It had watched generations come and go, decisions made, and consequences settle. Thomas felt its presence the way a man feels a question he cannot avoid. Behind him, the farmhouse windows glowed with soft Christmas light. Inside were warmth, coffee, and the quiet sound of his son moving through familiar rooms for the first time in months. Yet Thomas remained outside, caught between comfort and conscience, between what would be easy and what would be right. Richard Collins's voice still echoed in his thoughts, calm, confident, persuasive. Just a small adjustment, he had said. No one would notice. The kind of offer that wrapped convenience in reason and called it wisdom. But when Richard had spoken, the wind had shifted sharply, sudden and uneasy. Even Caleb, the old farm dog, had lifted his head and whined low, sensing something unsettled long before words could explain it. Thomas stared again at the fence line, snow gathering at its base. Leadership, he knew, was rarely loud. Integrity rarely dramatic. Most moral tests arrived quietly, disguised as opportunity. Snow thickened in the air, softening the horizon until land and sky nearly blended into one. And in that narrowing world, Thomas understood something was about to be decided. But it didn't start there. We must go back a little in time. Weeks earlier, December had entered the New England countryside without urgency. The days shortened gradually, as if the land itself respected transition. Morning frost traced thin white lines along the pasture, and mist lingered low over the fields before lifting, slow and patient, revealing the shape of things one layer at a time. Thomas Hale woke before dawn, as he had for most of his life. There was no alarm clock, no rush. His body carried its own sense of time, a discipline learned through repetition and responsibility. He pulled on his working gloves beside the kitchen table, the leather softened by years of use, and paused long enough to listen to the house breathe. The kettle hummed, the old floorboards creaked under steady steps. Outside, the barn stood quiet, waiting. This was where clarity once lived, in the rhythm of small, faithful actions. Purpose did not arrive as a feeling, but as direction. Feed first, check the animals, walk the fence, tend what had been entrusted to him. Thomas believed deeply that intentional living was built not through ambition, but through consistency. Daniel was already awake when Thomas entered the kitchen that morning. His son sat near the window, hands wrapped around a mug, watching the grey light stretch slowly across the land. He had come home for Christmas without much explanation, carrying more silence than luggage. "Morning," Thomas said, his voice calm, grounded. "Morning, Dad," Daniel replied. They shared no long conversation. They didn't need to. Emotional maturity often sounded like quiet. Outside, Caleb trotted ahead as Thomas walked the curved path toward the oak tree. The dog paused often, sniffing the air, attentive to changes Thomas couldn't see. Near the fence line, Thomas stopped and surveyed the land. Snow clung lightly to the wire. The posts stood firm, boundaries held. For a long time, that had been enough. But even then, beneath the order and routine, something had begun to shift. Taxes were higher this year. Equipment repairs had been postponed once too often. and the section of land near the oak, the part his grandfather had insisted never be touched, had drawn attention from town. Purpose remained, discipline remained, but direction had begun to feel narrower, less certain, like a road slowly closing in with snow. As the mist finally lifted, revealing the full stretch of the field, Thomas felt a faint tightening in his chest. Not fear, not panic, but the early awareness that clarity, once taken for granted, must sometimes be fought for. And winter had only just begun. Thomas Hale had never been a man drawn to grand plans. His dreams did not stretch toward expansion or recognition. They stayed close to the ground, shaped by stewardship rather than ambition. What he wanted was simple, yet demanding, to leave things whole. That afternoon, as daylight thinned and the cold deepened, Thomas walked alone toward the old oak tree. The snow beneath his boots made a soft, measured sound, each step deliberate. The curved path narrowed there, bending gently as it always had, reminding him that direction was rarely straight, but it still required choice. He stopped at the tree and rested one gloved hand against its bark. The oak was rough, solid, unchanged by trends or pressure. His grandfather had planted it near the boundary line on purpose, not as a marker for ownership, but as a reminder of responsibility. What you guard, the old man used to say, is what you believe matters. Thomas believed the land was not something he owned outright, but something entrusted to him for a season. His long-term vision was not about comfort, but continuity. He wanted Daniel to inherit more than soil and structures. He wanted him to inherit clarity, integrity, a sense of direction strong enough to withstand temptation. As the horizon softened into muted gold beneath thick winter clouds, Thomas bowed his head. His prayer was quiet, almost unfinished, the kind spoken more in posture than in words. He did not ask for wealth. He did not ask for ease. He asked for discernment, for wisdom to recognize the right path when it appeared narrow and costly. A strange calm settled over him then, still water in the spirit, not an answer, not yet, but a steadiness that held him in place long enough to breathe. Behind him, the farmhouse lights flickered on as dusk settled. Daniel watched from the window, unaware of the prayer, but aware of the weight. Some lessons, Thomas knew, were not taught directly. They were lived, absorbed quietly over time. As the last light slipped behind the hills, Thomas felt both anchored and uneasy. Purpose was clear. The dream remained intact, but clarity, he sensed, would soon be tested. And winter had a way of pressing men toward decisions they could not delay. The cold settled deeper into the land as December tightened its grip. The soil hardened until even the animals stepped carefully, and the fields lost their give beneath a skin of ice. Thomas felt it in his joints first, the dull ache that arrived before dawn and lingered long after the day's work was done. He continued his routines, but the rhythm had changed. Discipline remained, yet something underneath it had begun to thin. He moved through tasks with less focus, less intention. The rope he carried dragged heavier across the frozen ground, catching on roots and crusted snow. More than once, he considered leaving it behind, a small surrender that unsettled him more than the weight itself. Clarity slipped like frost on winter boards. One afternoon, a sharp wind cut across the pasture, bending the fence wire until it sang low and hollow. Thomas noticed a section near the oak leaning farther than it should have. The post had loosened in the frozen ground, its base cracked where moisture had crept in and expanded overnight. He stood there longer than necessary, staring at it. "I'll fix it tomorrow," he told himself. Tomorrow became the next day, then another. It wasn't laziness, it was fatigue, the kind that dulls resolve and makes delay feel reasonable. Inner strength, he was learning, did not vanish all at once. It eroded quietly, grain by grain, beneath constant pressure. Even Caleb seemed different. The old dog moved slower now, favoring one leg as he followed Thomas along the path. At night, he whined softly in his sleep, as if sensing a storm before the sky revealed it. Inside the house, Daniel noticed the changes. His father spoke less, paused more often, sat longer at the table after meals, staring into space with his hands wrapped around a cooling mug. Daniel wanted to ask questions, but restraint held him back. He was still learning that leadership often meant allowing space for a man to wrestle with himself. One evening, as the wind rattled the windows, Thomas stood at the back door and watched snow swirl under the porch light. His reflection stared back at him through the glass, familiar, steady, but worn. Discipline alone, he realized, was no longer enough without direction. And in that moment of honest recognition, the internal collapse reached its quiet center, not dramatic, not visible, but deeply real. Outside, the wind rose again, sharper this time, and it carried with it the promise that the trial ahead would not remain internal for long. Richard Collins returned on a morning that looked harmless enough. The sky was pale, the wind calmer than it had been in days, and the snow along the drive had been freshly packed. He arrived in a clean truck, stepped out with confident ease, and smiled as if winter itself had made room for him. Thomas recognized the danger in that kind of calm. They stood near the fence line, boots planted in snow that concealed the uneven ground beneath. Richard spoke with practiced patience, his tone warm, his words measured. He talked about opportunity, about foresight, about how a man had to think strategically if he wanted to protect his family in uncertain times. "It's a simple adjustment," Richard said, unfolding a set of papers and holding them against the wind. "The boundary's never been clear on record anyway. We'd just be clarifying things." Thomas listened without interrupting. Leadership, he knew, required restraint before response. But inside, something tightened. The boundary had always been clear. It just hadn't been written in ink that benefited someone else. Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This helps you too, clears some pressure, gives you breathing room. No one gets hurt." That was the lie that mattered most, the one wrapped in reason. The second visit came days later, this time with urgency. Richard spoke of timelines, of other interested parties, of how delays could complicate matters. He framed Thomas's hesitation as stubbornness rather than discernment. By the third meeting, the tone shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. Richard hinted at taxes, inspections, and how easily things could become inconvenient for a man who resisted progress. Moral pressure does not always arrive as threat. Sometimes it arrives as suggestion. Daniel overheard fragments from the kitchen window. He watched his father's shoulders stiffen, his jaw tighten. When Richard finally drove away, snow dust swirling behind him, Daniel stepped outside. "You okay?" he asked. Thomas nodded, though the answer was incomplete. "Just business." But it wasn't business. It was a test of integrity disguised as practicality, a choice between short-term relief and long-term vision, between convenience and character. That night, Thomas lay awake listening to the wind press against the house. His mind replayed Richard's words, weighing them against the quiet principles that had guided him for decades. Integrity, he knew, often cost more upfront than compromise, but it also protected what money never could. Outside, the fence creaked again under the weight of snow and wind, and Thomas understood the decision could no longer be postponed. Richard Collins moved quickly once Thomas refused to sign. Too quickly. Winter has a way of revealing what haste tries to hide. The land Richard had promised to multiple parties became the subject of quiet questions in town. A boundary dispute here, an overlooked easement there, words spoken too confidently in the wrong room. It started small, a delayed permit, a postponed inspection, then it spread. The town council requested documentation. Survey lines were reviewed more carefully than Richard had anticipated. What had once been smoothed over by reputation now demanded proof. Thomas heard about it the way rural news always travels, indirectly, without drama. A passing comment at the feed store, a lowered voice outside the post office. No one accused Richard openly. No one needed to. Ambition, unchecked by integrity, has a way of turning inward. One evening, as snow fell steadily outside the farmhouse, Thomas sat at the table repairing a length of rope. His hands worked methodically, each knot tightened with intention. Daniel watched in silence, sensing that something beyond the farm was unfolding. "They're asking questions about Collins," Daniel said carefully. Thomas nodded. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only a quiet confirmation. Character, he had learned, did not require retaliation. It only required time. Richard's presence in town thinned. His truck appeared less often. When it did, it moved faster, as if winter itself had grown impatient with him. The collapse was not dramatic, no confrontation, no public reckoning, just the steady unraveling of deals built on assumption rather than truth. Thomas walked the fence line again one cold afternoon. The leaning post still waited. Snow pressed heavily against it, and the wire groaned softly under strain. He placed his hand on the wood and felt the weakness beneath the surface. This, he thought, was the difference. Cleverness builds fast, character builds deep. As twilight settled and the horizon dimmed, Thomas felt the weight lift slightly from his chest. The moral test had been met, not with triumph, but with steadiness. Yet winter was not finished, and the greatest moment he sensed was still ahead. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in a storm. Snow fell thick and relentless, driven sideways by fierce wind that howled across the fields and pressed hard against the farmhouse walls. The old house groaned under the weight, each sound sharp in the night stillness. Thomas woke before dawn, not from noise but from instinct, the same quiet alertness that had guided him through years of responsibility. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The storm was at its peak. Snow stung his face. Visibility was nearly gone, yet something deeper than reason urged him forward. He moved slowly along the curved path, rope in hand, following memory more than sight. Caleb walked beside him, steady now, his limp gone, his posture calm despite the chaos around them. When Thomas reached the fence near the oak tree, his breath caught. The leaning post, the one he had delayed repairing, should have been gone. The wind had been strong enough to take it down. The wire should have collapsed, but there it stood. During the night, a heavy branch from the oak had fallen, not crushing the fence, but wedging itself perfectly against the weakened post, bracing it from behind. Snow had packed around it, tightening the support, holding everything firmly in place. What should have failed had been strengthened. Thomas stood there, stunned into stillness. The wind began to ease, not all at once, but decisively. The storm loosened its grip, as if released, clouds thinned, and then, slowly, unmistakably, light began to rise. The horizon opened into gold. Christmas morning arrived not with noise, but with clarity. The wind shifted gently, warm for winter, brushing across the field like reassurance. Caleb sat calmly at Thomas's feet, eyes alert, tail still, whole again. Daniel's voice came from behind him. "Dad." Thomas turned. His son stood there, watching the land, the fence, the sky. No explanation was needed. Some truths announced themselves without words. Thomas felt it then, not relief alone, but breakthrough. The quiet confirmation that integrity had been seen, that patience had not been wasted, that God's timing, though often silent, was never careless. A breath escaped his chest, half laughter, half prayer. God never arrives late. The land lay still before them, healed by storm rather than broken by it. And in that moment, Thomas understood. What he had guarded through pressure had been guarded in return. Christmas had come, not as a gift he opened, but as a truth he finally saw. Christmas morning settled gently over the land. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness so complete it felt intentional. Snow lay smooth across the fields, unmarked, as if offering the chance to begin again without erasing what had already been endured. Thomas Hale stood beside his son, watching sunlight stretch slowly across the pasture. The fence line held firm. The oak stood unbroken. Nothing looked different at first glance, and yet everything was. He understood now that leadership rarely announces itself in moments of ease. It reveals itself when a man chooses integrity, while the cost is real and the reward unseen. Small decisions, made faithfully and without witness, shape legacies more than grand gestures ever could. Purpose is not sustained by strength alone, but by clarity renewed through obedience. And character, once rooted deeply enough, outlasts every storm that tests it. Christmas had given him no lavish gift, only something far greater. Confirmation that what is guarded with faith is never forgotten by God. If this story slowed your heart and reminded you that small, faithful choices still matter, then stay here a little longer. Because the truth is, most of life's defining moments don't arrive loudly. They come quietly, disguised as ordinary days, simple decisions, and unseen acts of integrity. And the men and women who learn to recognize those moments are the ones who grow in clarity, resilience, and long-term purpose. On this channel, we don't chase noise. We build inner strength, emotional maturity, and spiritual insight, one grounded story at a time. These are reflections for those who want more than motivation, for those who want direction. If you're seeking wisdom that steadies your leadership, restores focus, and strengthens character when no one is watching, subscribe now. You'll find stories here that meet you where you are and gently guide you forward. And before you scroll away, look at the video appearing on your screen. That story continues this journey. Another quiet test, another moment where integrity shapes destiny. Stay with it. Some lessons only reveal themselves if you keep watching.